Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows come the best indie podcasts.
Autumn's Oddities is a strange and unusual podcast made by the strange and unusual, me, Autumn Gruby. Each week, I'll be taking you through some of the creepiest cases true crime has to offer. It won't only be true crime, I'll also be covering cryptids, haunted places, haunted things, and the true stories that inspired horror movies. Listen every Monday and Friday for new episodes, and remember, if it's creepy and weird, you'll find it here.
Hey everyone, welcome to True Crime California. I'm your host Cindy, and I'm glad you're here. Hey guys, I'm back. Thanks for your patience. You know, I had this episode done research-wise like over a week ago, but it's been so hard to find time to record, like a quiet moment to do this. But it's pouring rain in Los Angeles, like the worst rain I've ever seen. So now seemed like a good time to dive in and get this recorded. I know I have done an episode since Halloween, but I just wanted to say again, I hope everybody had a great Halloween. I'm very sad it's over. I think, again, maybe I mentioned this, but I went as Judy Gemstone, which if you haven't watched The Righteous Gemstones, you're fucking up. Get on it. Shit is absolutely hilarious. It's a Danny McBride show. It's fucking great. Check it out. And Judy, so she's the sister and she's like hilarious. But I was like, oh, I'm going to dress like her because she dresses kind of gaudy and she's got this really like kind of frizzy, curly hair. The family in the show is super, super rich. And the costume designer was not playing around. Everything that woman wears is like $2,500 plus. It's like very, very designer, even if it's tacky, even if it's like vintage. So trying to dress up like her was very, very difficult. And so I feel like I fell a little short. I'm going to try again next year probably and really like figure out how to get an outfit that looks like her that doesn't cost like my rent. But anyway, it was still really fun. The wig was hilarious. Had a great time. I hope everybody else had a great time. Very sad that, you know, Halloween is over, but I'm looking forward to Christmas. You know, I've got a 10-year-old, so it's more fun for me now than when I was like childless and didn't really give a shit about Christmas. I've really leaned into it now, which is weird, like caring about the holiday and really getting into it. I love holiday music now. I don't know who I am. Anyway, hope you all love it as well. Don't be afraid to shout it from the rooftops if you do. I'm right there with you. Anyway, okay, let's get into the topic that I chose, the story that I chose. I chose a survival story, and I want to call out, I feel like a lot of people who have covered this case or talked about this case, it's a pretty well-known case, they really talk about it as like having a happy ending. And I mean, comparatively, it does. But that being said, I think we're all a little too indoctrinated by Hollywood and like the happy ending, you know, where people go through absolute hell. They suffer like violence and all sorts of horrific shit. But in the end, because they survive, they're quote unquote like happy and sort of just like move on with their lives. I think the reality is that many people who survive, it's a much more complicated postscript, if you will. I think sort of celebrating people's survival without recognizing their extreme trauma sets people up for a lifetime of reliving that trauma, because nobody really stops to think about the amount of therapy it's going to take or would take to get over something like, I don't know, let's say like what Mary Vincent went through. And I'll absolutely cover her story at some point. I promise. I love her story. So anyway, I do want to say that again, comparatively, this story has a happy ending in that nobody dies, but the lasting effects of what went on during this kidnapping, that's what it is, shouldn't be ignored or forgotten, so I wanted to call that out. And I will talk about it a little bit as well. So this is the Chowchilla Bus Kidnapping. And again, it's a pretty well-known case. If you know it, hopefully you like the way I tell it. If you don't know it, welcome. Get ready for some weird shit. Okay, so this takes place in Chowchilla, California on July 15th, 1976. So this is a 70s case. Now, I've talked a bit about the different areas of California. We have along the coast, the big cities, and I know that I've touched on the smaller communities as well, but I really wanted to reiterate that small towns are honestly what make up most of California, even today. California provides our nation with nearly half of all the fruits and vegetables that our entire country eats in a year, which is extremely significant and really needs to be understood to kind of comprehend just how much of our state is farmland. We farm fruits, veggies, cattle, dairy, chickens. It goes on and on and on. And yes, cattle and dairy are different because there's meat farms and there's dairy farms. So, very much we live in an agricultural state. I live in an agricultural state. And we always think about the big cities and the beaches and, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, even Sacramento. But Sacramento is agricultural as fuck. Like, it's all farms out there. But anyway, the point is, I think when people haven't really visited California, or even if you only live in a big city in California your whole life, not even Californians themselves realize how much farmland there is where we live. Now, Chowchilla is located in what I would say is the very dead center of California. I think anybody would say that, actually. It's not close to the ocean. It's not close to Arizona. It's honestly like right in between the two. It's also about 350 miles from Mexico and also 350 miles from Oregon. So it couldn't be more in the center of the state if it tried. It's just west of Fresno, which I think, as you will recall, that's where Kristen Smart was raised. So we've definitely talked about Fresno a bit. And Chowchilla is very much a cow town, if you will. That's kind of what we call rural towns. Lots of farmers, lots of migrant workers, not a very rich town. But back in the 70s, it was very, very safe. In 1976, Chowchilla had a population of about 19,000 residents, and most of them knew one another. So very small, very rural, very safe. Now, as I noted, this takes place in the middle of summer in July. And another thing people may not know about California is that it gets hot here. Like over 100, pushing 110 in the summer hot. And this is especially in Central California, but like where I grew up, which is like northern Central California, it's like that too. And even in LA, like 100 degrees is like not abnormal. So it's middle of July, dead of summer, super hot, and many of the kids in town are going to a summer school. And this is kids ranging from ages 5 to 14 years old. So a wide range, all in one summer school. And this is, again, because it's a very small town. And this summer school, it was definitely like a school, but it was also a little bit more like a summer camp. And I think sort of like a way for the families who are farming and working to have childcare for their children through the summer. So the kids would go do school type stuff a little bit in the beginning of the day, but then it would turn into like fun stuff later on. And on that day, July 15th, the kids had all gone to the local pool. At 3 p.m., they got picked up by their bus driver, Ed Ray, who was a 55-year-old former farmer who still farmed on the side, but had taken a job as a bus driver as he really enjoyed being around children, and all of his were grown up. And I think that's really, really sweet that this man became a bus driver just so that he could still have children in his life. I think it's something that people don't really think about, like men and especially like grandfathers wanting to have those types of relationships. I think that's very, very sweet. Ed, who all the children called Edward, was a well-known and very well-respected man in his community. He had been a hard worker his entire life and was a trusted and trustworthy man who the kids all loved. He was married to his wife of many years, Odessa, and they had a very simple life. On this day, he picked the kids up and went on his route. He made 2 stops, dropping off, I think, 4 or so kids, then continued on with the 26 still remaining on the bus. He came up to a fork in the road, and these are long country roads, which are what I grew up learning to drive on, so very desolate, not really near anything. And in the middle of the road where he's supposed to turn, there is a van. And this van is blocking traffic entirely, even though the school bus is the only vehicle anywhere nearby. As I said, this is a small, safe town, and everybody knows everybody, so Ed goes to roll down the window and begins to ask if anybody needs help. As he's doing this, a man comes out from behind, I think, the front of the van, but he clearly doesn't need help. He's holding a shotgun and has a stocking over his head to distort his facial features. A second man appears, and the first man says to Ed, "Open up." Now, Ed is a tough guy, but he isn't a tough guy, if you know what I mean. So he has no reason to try to be a hero, and he wants to keep the kids safe. At first, some of the kids thought this was a joke, so even after he opened up and let the men on, one of the kids shouted, "We didn't do it!" Like thinking this was all like a big joke. But Ed's tone, harsher than the kids had ever heard, let them know this wasn't, in fact, a joke. And pretty immediately, the kids went from happy and carefree to absolutely terrified. Now, these two men with the stockings over their head took control of the bus, and drove it a short distance to an area covered by a bamboo forest. And hidden in this bamboo forest is another man with another van. So we have the one man who took over, well, we have the two men, but one of them drove the school bus. The other one drove the white van that had been blocking the school bus. And then they met up in this hidden bamboo forest with a third man and another van. And now I know it sounds really weird, a bamboo forest, like in Central California, but yes, like I said, we grow everything, including grasses, which bamboo is a grass. And so they chose this bamboo forest because, again, it's in the middle of nowhere, it's super remote, and the bamboo grows super, super tall. So you could hide the school bus in it, you could hide the vans in it. Nobody had any idea that anything was going on there because you couldn't see anything from the road. Now, from there, they drive a little while into the grove of bamboo, which, like I said, is taller than the bus. And then from there, they make the children get into each of the two vans, either the original white van or the second van. Half go into the first and half go into the second. And one thing that they did that I felt was like kind of weird, and it could be seen as smart, but it could also be seen as like completely unnecessary, was they actually made the kids jump from the bus to the van. So there were no footprints. But I feel like you have the, original bus being left there. You have tire tracks from vans. It's not like people are going to be like, "Oh, well, I guess the kids must not have got onto the vans because we don't have footprints." Like, it seems really like overcomplicated and kind of unnecessary to make them jump. Like, that's going to fool anybody. Like, where they're not going to figure out what happened. Very, very strange. And I want to be clear, pardon me, that this entire kidnapping is absolutely fucking stupid. And we'll talk about the morons that perpetrated this crime and their insane reasoning for it. But I just want to call that out because, like, I've heard that referred to as, like, smart. And I'm like, how is that smart? It doesn't fool anybody. It's worthless. So it's really weird how in some ways they sort of, like, thought through things. And then in other ways they couldn't be more of, like, a bungling criminal stereotype. But in no way were they actually smart. But anyway, so the kids get moved into the two buses forced by these men with the guns in their hands. These vans are completely blacked out. No windows, no light, no airflow. They have like wood paneling all over them. It's pitch black. And super hot inside because no AC and it's the dead of summer. And there's no food and there's no water. So these little kids, again, ranging age 5 to 14, and their poor 55-year-old bus driver, Ed Ray, are in these buses. And once they're split up, they begin driving. And they drive in these hot, blacked out vans for 11 hours straight. 11 hours. Now, during the drive, the kids would alternate between crying, vomiting from car sickness, soil themselves, because again, like many of them are younger than 10, and it's been hours and hours since they've, used the bathroom. But they would also sing songs because they are kids. And even in the worst situations, kids have this irrepressible hope in them that is so, so magical. Now, the songs they were singing were things like, "If you're sad and you know it, clap your hands." But still, they were singing, and in a weird way, kind of making the best of the situation. Now, finally, after 11 hours of heat and darkness and fear, the vans stopped. And this is the middle of the night. It's like 3 a.m. And when they stopped, the kids grew even more scared, of course. And this definitely was not helped by what happened next. One by one, the kids were taken out of the van, leaving the rest of the captives in the dark, not knowing what was going on, so of course, assuming the worst. The kids all thought they were being taken off the van one by one to be killed before the kidnappers would come back for the next victim. 14-year-old Michael Marshall was one of the oldest kids on the bus when it was taken, and he immediately took to reassuring the younger kids that everything would be okay. he ended up in the same van as the youngest passenger, 5-year-old Monica Artery. When it came time for one of the two of them to get out of the van, they were the last two in the van, he pushed her behind him, said not to worry, and that he would go first. It wouldn't have made a difference in the end if they were in fact killing them all, but his willingness to go first and to try to protect her for as long as he could is really commendable, especially given the situation. Now, what was actually happening to each of the kids and to Ed was far better than death, but far worse than just being let go. The kidnappers had driven the kids only about 110 miles from their home to a rock quarry located in Livermore, which is mostly north, but also a little bit west of Chowchilla, sort of just before the Bay Area, but still in a mostly agricultural area. The kidnappers had buried a moving truck in the ground in an sort of abandoned area of the quarry, and were taking the kids out one by one, writing down their names and ages, and then sending them down into that dark, hot, underground prison. Now, this truck, which I think was a 26-foot box truck, so not huge, maybe not even that big, maybe only 16 feet. I think that's the smaller one. It had been crudely modified, had about 1 meal's worth of food for each of the captives. This included cereal, bread, and peanut butter. It also had dirty mattresses strewn all over, and the wheel wells had holes cut into them to make a crude toilet for the kids to use. So where the wheels would be, they basically just cut a hole that goes into the ground, and so they can go to the bathroom in there. But there's no cover for it, so anything they do, you're going to smell it. It's just going to come right back up into the truck. It's very, very hot. Again, there's very little airflow. One thing that the captors did do was they cut a hole into the top of the truck, and they put a fan in there, so the fan would sort of make the air circulate, but nobody knew how long this was going to last, and if it was on a battery or what was going to happen, and nobody knew what would happen if and when it shut off. So very, very scary, very hot, very claustrophobic, very stinky, very small, very little food, very, very bad situation. After Ed and all the kids were in the truck, the kidnappers covered the hole above with a metal sheet, put 2 large truck batteries on top, each weighing around 100 pounds, and then, to the horror of everyone inside, started shoveling dirt on top of that, which I don't think they could see that happening, but they could certainly hear it. And I feel like that is almost worse. As you can imagine, inside this truck was cramped. It's not a big space, plus, like I said, it's covered in mattresses, so everyone is on top of one another. So very claustrophobic, very dark, very hot. So more of the same, but this felt definitely more permanent because they're no longer with the captors. The captors said, we're going to come back for you, but who the hell knows? And who knows if they're going to be alive? Who knows if the fan is going to keep the air flowing? Who knows if they're going to starve or run out of water? I mean, they have no idea. So when the kidnappers left, on top of saying, we'll be back for you, they threw down a roll of toilet paper, which feels very benevolent. And again, even if these men did come back, it could be too late. So Ed and the older boys, including Michael, started to look around for a way out, but couldn't find anything. After a while, Ed told the kids it was time for them to get some sleep, because what else could they do? They'd been up for well over 24 hours at this point, and again, many of these kids are under 10 years old. So the kids tried to listen, they tried to get some rest, but it wasn't exactly successful, as you can imagine. The kids would be quiet for a moment, but then one would begin crying, and then everybody would cry. They ran out of food, water. The walls felt like they were caving in, but they also actually were. The weight of the dirt was actually starting to push the walls of the truck in around the kids. So this is absolutely fucking terrifying. Finally, the older kids, including 10-year-old Jody Heffington, who was tall and very strong for her age, began stacking up the mattresses so they could get closer to the hole in the top of the truck. They stood on these mattresses, then on each other's shoulders, and pushed as hard as they could. Now remember, it's the dead of summer, and even in Livermore, it's in the upper 80s at least at this time of year, even in the middle of the night. So it's hot in there. And these kids and Ed are all working hard to get out of this box. But remember, there's a couple 100 pounds on top of the cover, so it's not exactly an easy task. They work for hours, and finally, Michael uses his legs to push. This is 14-year-old Michael. And they all see a tiny ray of light come through the top of the opening. As a note, the fans had already stopped working a while back, and this tiny crack allowed the first fresh air the kids had breathed in hours. From here, they know they can get out if they keep pushing. Michael Marshall opened the hole just enough to crawl up in, kind of out of it, and he finds himself inside a large box the kidnappers had constructed around the hole. So he had to dig out of that, which he does, but takes more time. So basically, it was weird. There's like a photo of it or like a drawing that you can see online. They basically I hit my mic, sorry. They put the covering over the hole where the kids climb down into the truck. They covered that with like the metal sheet. They put the batteries on top of that. They buried dirt on it. And then on top of that, they put a box around it. Now, I think the reason they did this was so that it didn't look like a metal sheet with batteries on it. So if somebody was walking by the quarry, they wouldn't be like, what the fuck is this? But it ended up just taking more time for him to dig out of it, because he had to dig underneath the box to get out. So you had to dig up through the hole, under the box, like a tunnel, and then get out. So he digs his way out, then turns back and gets each of the kids out one by one, with Ed below helping to pull them up until everyone is out. Finally, Ed climbs out and leads the kids away from the truck. So they were in there for probably 12 hours and they freed themselves. And those motherfucking kidnappers never fucking came back to check on them. Now, they pretty quickly realize they're in a quarry, and it's now mid to late afternoon on July 16th. They had been in that hole for 16 hours, but luckily were able to climb out during working hours, so there were a lot of people on site at the quarry. They walked up to a man, and as they did, he said, quote, "The whole world's been looking for you." And he was not exaggerating even a little bit. The story of these missing kids and this missing bus was the biggest story in months. It had reached other countries within hours of the kids being taken. It was all over the news. The parents were being interviewed. I mean, this was the story, of the century, It was the biggest kidnapping in the history of the U.S. at the time, and I think still to this day. So totally fair that it was major, major news. The FBI was on the case. News people were everywhere. It was just crazy. And in the end, despite police doing everything they could to find the kids, they ended up rescuing themselves with the help of Ed, of course. The man they found, who said, the world's been looking for you, of course called the police, who arrived shortly thereafter and also notified the parents that the kids had been found. The kids were taken to the only place that could hold and treat them all at once, which was a jail. Really bad timing considering what they'd just been through. Also, I should note that in addition to taking them to the jail, they took them there by bus, which was probably very triggering for the poor kids. Once at this prison, they were treated for minor wounds, mostly scrapes from escaping the hole. They were given clothing for those who had none, because the kidnappers did take some of their clothing, including most of Ed's, who'd been stripped to his underwear. And they were also fed and given water, which they hadn't had in many hours. The police also took photos of each kid before they were transported to the jail. And I think these photos can all be found online. And it's so funny to me because half the kids are smiling. Like, they just naturally oh, it's time to take a picture. I'm going to smile. Like, they haven't realized that they don't have to smile just because their picture is being taken. And it's just such a weird, these kids have just been through hell and they're grinning. It's so bizarre. And I mean, to be fair, I'm sure they were super happy in the moment, but I just think it really speaks to the innocence of children. Just like when they're singing, while they're being kidnapped. Before the kids are released from the prison, each was interrogated individually to get their stories about what happened. This was probably really scary for the kids, and it sucks that it had to happen, but the police wanted to make sure they knew who to look for and exactly what happened to these kids. I watched interviews with some of the kids later when they were adults, and they all said that everybody was very nice to them, of course, but still, it's a very traumatic thing to be kidnapped in a bus, then taken by a bus to a jail, then interrogated before you finally get to see your parents. Now, when they're done with these interviews, they're put on another bus and taken home to their parents. When they arrive in Chowchilla, they get off the bus and they're surrounded by their families, but also the media, who are taking photos and videos and asking for interviews before the kids even get to see their parents. After the kids went home, They did give interviews. They didn't really do it that night because, like, that's super inappropriate. But when they did give interviews, they were super sweet. Jennifer Brown, who was 9 years old when she was taken, was asked why she thought the kidnappers did what they did. She replied, "I don't know. Maybe they didn't have enough love." So already just, like, or still, I should say, like, empathetic and sweet. Now, outwardly, the kids were all still sweet and kind, but their parents would later tell tales of horrific nightmares, or the kids not being able to sleep at all, and that they didn't want to close their eyes to see the men again. Larry Park, who was only 6 at the time he was taken, had a very tough time after his return, and as a teen, turned to drugs to calm his mind, which was filled with fear and anger and nightmares. Now, I do want to say that later on, he turned his life around and has become, like, I think, like, a speaker, and he's just like a really cool guy. He's interviewed in like the 48 Hours about this case. But, you know, he had a really, really difficult time because of something that was not his fault that just happened to him. Now, as I said, Jody Heffington, who I think had been only 10 years old and was very like big and strong, had also been really sassy with the kidnappers. But she later said nothing was the same after that. So even the kids who are like outwardly not scared are terrified, and their lives have been changed forever. So again, this took a really big toll on the kids, but Ed as well. Years later, Ed was doing an interview and tried to say he was no longer bothered by what happened. Now, obviously, he's going to be a very stoic man. He's a farmer. He's manly. He's not going to talk about his feelings. However, his wife, Odessa, spoke up and said, "You're still bothered by it." And she then started telling reporters that sometimes she'd find Ed crying in the garage. So this is just heartbreaking to hear. And to anybody mad at her for telling his secrets, she was trying to help him confront his feelings rather than lie about and hide them, which I think, even if a bit gruff, in the end is a very loving act. And I think he probably saw it that way. So now we know about the victims and the lasting effects on their lives, but what about the kidnappers? As you can guess, they were caught pretty quickly after all this went down. I'm going to tell you about them. The police figured out quickly that anybody who had enough time to bury a truck in a rock quarry must have had some sort of legal access to that quarry. And that made their list pretty damn small. Almost immediately, police turned to the family who owned the quarry, and specifically to Frederick Newhall Woods III, the son of the owner of the quarry. Now, I say the third with a question mark because he may have been the fourth, but I think his dad had a different middle name, and the family was just like wealthy enough that they made their own rules regarding juniors. But anyway, he's Frederick Newhall Woods, I believe the third. Now, Fred Woods, 24 at the time, came from a family of supreme wealth. He was born and raised in Portola Valley on a 78-acre estate. So he was for want of nothing. Now, first, 78 acres is roughly 78 football fields. So fucking huge, like insanely large. And the location of this gigantic estate is, as I mentioned, in Portola Valley, which is one of the richest communities in the country and has been for years, including back in the 60s and 70s. So this kid came from a ton of money from a family who was elite among the elite. His last name was Woods, but Newhall was in there as well, as you could tell, as you heard. And there is a Newhall, California, as well as the Newhall Pass, which was in fact named after his family. So he is just really, really rich. Beyond his obvious connection to the quarry, Fred here came under scrutiny from the police because only about a year before this, he had been arrested for car theft and joyriding, along with 2 of his friends, who I would call more his lackeys or henchmen. These 2 brothers were 24-year-old James and 22-year-old Richard Schoenberg, sons of a prominent podiatrist also from the area. So they also have a lot of money and status, and they're from Portola Valley. These kids have no reason to need anything, so why are they doing what they're doing? Now, these 3, despite having all the money in the world and seemingly probably being able to like choose their own adventure as far as their life goes, they were all seen as loners, losers, and never up to any good, despite having all the opportunity in the world to just be decent people. Like, if I was that rich, I'd be on vacation or out helping the needy. Like, I wouldn't be fucking around and like kidnapping children. Like, what the fuck? But these idiots, they just kept getting in trouble over and over, and they just couldn't keep their shit clean. So the police look into these guys, and in fact, they issue warrants for their arrest. But they don't do this right away. So they do this, they're like, oh, we think these are our guys. So then they search the quarry, and then they get what's it called? A warrant. Oh my God, my brain. To search the Woods estate. And in this estate, they find an insane amount of evidence pointing to these idiots being behind this. Some of the items that they found, and this is just silly, including, God, this is so dumb. They found a piece of paper that said plan up top and outlined their step-by-step plan to kidnap a busload of children for ransom. This plan had a little list of things to do, like a laundry list. And some of the things said, stop a bus, transfer the occupants, put occupants to sleep, which they didn't do, but I think that was the 11-hour drive. A couple other stupid things. Then says, take clothing, put clothing and ransom note in suitcase, and then it just jumps to police find clothes and instructions. Now, this is just a small sampling of the idiocy of this very ill-planned note, and it's just one of the many things that they found in the home that pretty much proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that these morons were the ones behind this. Now, what's the saddest thing to me about this whole thing is that apparently this plan had been in the works for well over a year, which, considering how stupid it is actually kind of impressive. The men had planned to kidnap the kids, demand $5 million ransom, which in the 70s is a ton of money, and then disappear somehow. Now, they knew when they were taking these kids that their families were not going to have the money. But a kidnapping of this scale is going to bring in the FBI and the government. And the ransom they wanted was going to come from the government. So they're trying some federal shit here. Now, the only part of the plan in my mind that was even remotely smart was asking police to drop the ransom in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where they would have been able to sort of hide out and then retrieve it. It's acres and acres of woods, so it would have been really difficult for police to navigate or even see them. So they would have been able to get in and out without the cops catching them. I should mention that one part of their plan said to, quote, keep cool, which may have referred to the kids underground, but I like to think it was like a mid-note pep talk to themselves. I also wanted to note that they were asking to be called Beelzebub, but they had spelled it wrong, which is insane. And I heard, and I read a few places, that they had actually been inspired to kidnap this busload of children from the movie Dirty Harry. And if you've seen that movie, they kidnap a busload of children. So this idea isn't even original. It's poorly planned, and they just leave evidence fucking everywhere. Now, I do want to call out, because you're like, okay, well, what happened to the ransom? Because the news knows about it, the world knows about it, the kids are in this hole for 16 hours. Why was there no ransom? Like, why did the police never get a call or a letter or whatever? And I'll explain that to you right now. And this is really the most ridiculous part of this. So Fred, James, and Richard, they go back, I think, to Fred's house after this, and they're tired. You know, they're like, man, that was 24 hours straight of like kidnapping we just did. Man, that was a long day. Let's call the police. So they call the police in Chowchilla to give them their ransom. I think they're going to, just chat it to them over the phone. But because everybody in the world knows about this, and because the Chowchilla police they're tiny, there's probably like 10 cops, the lines are busy. They cannot get through. So what do these idiots do? Do they call the FBI? Do they call a different police station knowing they'll know what they're talking about? No, they don't do any of that. They decide they'll just wait it out a little bit, and in the meantime, they're going to go ahead and take a nap. So these idiots, they straight up go home and put themselves to bed because they're tired. And meanwhile, these kids and Ed dig themselves out of this hole, rescue themselves, and completely foil their plan, which is idiotic anyway. So anyway, after their names are released, and having done nothing, having accomplished nothing by this, James and Fred go on the run, and Fred actually makes it all the way up to Vancouver before he's caught, and he is caught. Now, Richard, the youngest of the group, and very clearly the biggest follower of all of them, got scared, reached out to his parents, and with his lawyer, turned himself in on July 23rd of that year. So like literally 8 days after the kidnapping. That's how quickly they worked out who was to blame. Once he turned himself in and admitted to the crime, his brother was caught in Menlo Park while preparing to surrender because he also knew he wasn't going to get away. And then Fred, who had somehow made it into Vancouver, was arrested the same day that James was, but he had made it out of the country. So now these guys are all in custody and they get hit with a number of charges. And they plan to plead guilty to all of them except for the charge of bodily harm. Because if you plead guilty to bodily harm during the commission of a kidnapping, your automatic sentence is life without parole. And what they were saying is these kids were not harmed. Yeah, maybe they have a couple of scrapes from climbing out of the hole, but we didn't hit them. We didn't tie them up. We didn't beat them. There was nothing really done to them. And I want to call out that the extreme mental trauma and mental harm that they underwent during this process was not considered at the time. Now, it didn't matter at the beginning here because they were all found guilty on all charges, including the bodily harm. But what I will call out is that within about 10 years of these idiots being sentenced, 2 of their lawyers, or actually I think all 3, I think it was like Fred's lawyers because his parents were richer than God, basically. They argued that the bodily harm wasn't fair because cuts and bruises don't meet the requirement of bodily harm. And because they had these high-powered lawyers and because they were well-connected and because they argued well, that was turned over. And all 3 of these guys were then given life with parole. Now, I want to say what they did was horrible. It was heinous. It was terrible. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Fred Woods here and why I think he should have stayed in prison forever. But these other 2 idiots, they were in their early 20s. They were just stupid. They were followers. Yes, I think they should have been locked up for a long time. No, I don't think that this is something that they should have been put in prison for the rest of their lives for, especially because nobody died. And I know that might be controversial, but I feel like as a nation and as a people, we are far too angry. We are far too punitive. And I think that you really have to kind of consider, like, that's forever. Is that really an appropriate, punishment? And some of you may say yes, and I understand where you're coming from. But the thing that I want to point out is the only reason these guys were given this opportunity is because they're rich. To me, that's the bigger problem than them actually getting it overturned. Because I don't necessarily disagree with overturning it. I just don't like that they were able to do that where other people wouldn't be able to do that. So anyway, they did get this overturned and they were given the possibility of parole. And also, I couldn't find it exactly who it was, but one of the captives, I think her way of kind of dealing with her trauma is that she started talking to some of these kidnappers. I think it was like Richard and James. And she started to want them to be released, I think as part of like her healing, was she wanted to be able to forgive them and let them be free. So I find that really interesting as well, because like the way that all of these people sort of individually dealt with what happened to them has a very wide range of like feelings and responses and actions. And I found that one really interesting. So, okay, they wanted $5 million. I kind of talked about that, but I kind of want to go back for a minute because why did these rich ass kids want $5 million? Well, what it came down to for Fred Woods was that he never met his father's expectations. He had already been married and divorced. He couldn't keep a job, and he had a really big spending habit. He actually collected cars, everything from like classics to just junkers and everything in between, and he couldn't stop spending money on it. So at the time that he wanted this money, one, he was in debt to people for like all of the stuff he had bought because he's like, oh, I'm good for it. My family's rich, whatever. And then couldn't come up with the money because his dad's like, get a fucking job. And 2, when he was asked later, he literally said, I just wanted a cool car. So he literally kidnapped 27 people, 26 of them children, so that he could buy a fast car when he already had like, 50 fucking cars on the property in various conditions. And then the brothers, they just did it because they were followers and they did whatever Fred was telling him to do. So just absolutely fucking pointless, idiotic, and pathetic, just straight up pathetic. In any case, I want to call out that Richard Schoenfeld, who was 22 at the time of the kidnapping, was paroled in 2012 at age 57. He was paroled after being an absolute model prisoner from the moment he entered prison until the moment he was released. And since then, has done nothing of note. He has just lived a normal life, been a normal dude, no problems. His brother James was paroled 3 years later. He was 24 at the time of the kidnapping, and he was paroled in 2015 at the age of 63. Same thing as Richard. Model prisoner, never any problems, realized what a mistake he had made, lived his life trying to make it up, and was released and has just kind of faded away, probably has family money, and is just living a quiet life. Now, Fred, on the other hand, was not paroled until 2022 at the age of 70. One of the reasons for this is because he was seen as the ringleader, totally, which is totally fair. But another reason is that he was a total fucking shitbag in prison from start to finish. He was constantly buying and selling things he wasn't allowed to. He was running a fucking business from behind bars, which he's not supposed to do. He was getting married. He was buying houses. He was doing all sorts of unscrupulous shit that just showed that, unlike the two brothers, this is who Fred Woods was and is to this day. Now, as far as his family's immense wealth, I don't know how much of it he has. I know he bought an almost $2 million house while he was still in prison. So obviously he's got something from his parents. But I also know that 78-acre estate was actually given to the city and turned into a historic landmark. Not because the family is necessarily significant, although, again, the Newhall family, like on his mom's side, I think it was on his mom's side. Anyway, they were definitely significant or are significant to California history. But I think it was more that it was a very old space and just like a wildlife preserve. And so his childhood home is now part of that. I also think that potentially his family donated it for like tax reasons, but maybe also because his dad was like, fuck this guy. He's in prison forever. I'm not giving him shit. So it could have been his sort of like final fuck you to his son before he died. I don't really know. What I do know is you can go visit the space if you want to and like see the house, which I really want to do. And next time I'm up north, I'm absolutely going to do it. It's in Portola Valley. So again, like the richest part of the rich ass Bay Area. Anyway, he was finally paroled in 2022 at the age of 70. And since then, I haven't heard shit about him either. And I've looked it up and it seems like he's probably being a shitbag, but he's not doing anything that's like making the news. So in any case, that's the story. Very fucking scary, very fucking crazy. Feel really bad for these kids. Ed, obviously, he was 55 at the time, so he has passed since then. But they have multiple like plaques, and I think they named a park after him, like the Ed Ray and Children Park in Chowchilla. He is a local hero. It's mentioned on the Chowchilla City website, what happened. And again, he's lauded as like an absolute hero who saved all of these children. And I really do think that without Ed being there, things could have gone a very different way. So I'm very glad that he was there. I'm very glad that he took care of the kids. And I'm very glad that he's being remembered exactly how he should have been, because he was a wonderful guy. I really hope the best for all of these kids. Who are now adults, or older than me. I really hope everybody who survived this is doing okay. I can't imagine what that's like. And I hope everybody listening enjoyed the story. So thanks again for tuning in. I'll be back soon with another episode. And until then, stay safe.